Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Wow, we've got a fun guest today. And, before we got on the air, Josh was, Josh just has many voices. There's no way around it. And if I close my eyes, I would swear Jim Wideman had entered the studio and is part of our time in our recording. So Josh, give us a little bit of Jim Wideman, and then we're going to have to do it at the end so people hear it at the end too.
Well, Bob, I'm so glad to be on the podcast. I just think this is wonderful. All the many things that D6 is doing for the kingdom, and I'm just glad to be a part of it.
Exactly.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Yeah, Jim is one of your dear friends, all of our friends, but I mean, you've had a special relationship with him for a number of years, Josh. So,
yes, he is like a spiritual father to me, a mentor. I have been on his heels since my first conference in ministry, and I have been learning from him for over 20 years now, and I do have the privilege of calling him a dear friend.
That is awesome.
One of the things I love about Jim is literally the fire truth flows out of him every word. I mean, every word he says is like, I need to write this down and think about it. And so this interview is so wonderful. There is so much. I want to just prepare our listeners. You're going to want to get your notes app ready. You're going to want to get your Post-it notes ready. And if you're resistant to change, this is a podcast you need to make time for. So to the next app, this is my question I want to lead into. One of the things that Jim says, he says something very profound towards the end of the interview. So listen for it. And just how we are to operate in change and generational discipleship. It's significant and it's a wow. And I want to let him be the voice. I want to let his words be what you hear. But to open us up, one of the things he mentions is he talks about the significance of apps, the significance of how apps are important to different generations. So I want to ask you guys the question that he asks often. What are 2 apps that you just cannot live without?
See, I could go spiritual or I could just be real, and I'm just going to be real. Like the one app that I love is still the Find My iPhone app, because I can see where my kids are, where my family is. It's one that I check up on the folks and see where everybody's at. I have family and friends that are shared on that app, and it lets me to know at a glimpse where everybody's at in our family. I know it's kind of a lame and confession time. I've been all over TikTok here recently. I've got the algorithm to understand me now, and it's a very valuable teaching tool, and really enjoying it.
Man, I'm going practical too. Back prior to 2020, I decided not to watch news. I only read news now. And so I read it all on my phone. And so I have a couple of different news apps that I'm going to go to every single day and read news and take that in. I want to share one that I don't use every day because it doesn't have enough people using it yet, but maybe sharing this will kind of broaden those waters. But I love the app, What 3 Words? It's a wonderful app that is a way to narrow where somebody's located within 3 by 3 meters. So it's really helpful if you're inside of a building, like a large church, now one level, But you can say, hey, I'm at, picture wood frame. And if they receive those 3 words in the app, they put them back in and they can walk right to you and inside of any building. You don't need cross streets. You don't need anything else. And this app is just amazing at narrowing down where somebody is. There's a cool TED Talk on it. I'll leave it at that. How about you, Marianne?
So interesting.
Yeah.
2 of mine. One is Life 360, because I have teenage driver. And I also have a mother who's a widow and, in her mid 70s. And so that tracking where everybody is important. I'm going to go kind of old school too, but just to say my texting app, this is a really significant time right now in parenting for us. And what I'm realizing about parenting gentlemen is they sometimes share their heart via text. And so that's been a really significant communication. I can't imagine not having that because some deep heart conversations happen in text messages for us. So those are my 2.
That's good. That's good. Well, I do love, and Jim said that, and I love how you've entered into that. He said he's had the ability to lead generations 40 years younger than him because of 2 things. He wants to stay connected, but he doesn't make any pretensions about not knowing everything, and he's willing to learn from those generations. So I agree. Pull out your notes app, pull out your stylus, whatever you take notes on. We took tons of notes listening to Jim, and I'm always blown away by his insights. So let's listen to Jim, and we'll come back and discuss some of his insights and wisdom.
Did you know that because of D6 Heroes, Randall House and D6 Family are able to equip families far and wide in the area of generational discipleship? Due to the financial gifts of both individuals and churches, D6 curriculum has been translated into multiple languages and distributed across the globe, including restricted access countries for use in the underground church. In short, because of the financial gifts of individuals like you, moms and dads all over the world can pass their faith to the next generation of believers. Would you consider becoming a D6 hero? A D6 hero is an individual who invests their financial resources in the ministry of Randall House and D6 Family to ensure that believers can transfer their faith through the church and home. Please visit d6hero.com to join the ranks of our heroes and to explore other areas where your financial investment can have an impact.
Right now, I am joined by Jim Wideman. Jim is considered an innovator, pioneer, and one of the fathers of the modern family ministry movement. He is a speaker, teacher, and author with over 45 years of experience in the local church. Jim and his amazing wife, Julie, have 2 wonderful daughters and 3 handsome grandsons. Jim, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Hey, it is an honor to be back.
It's so good to have you here. Over 45 years of experience in the local church. That
48.
So we're getting close to 50.
Getting close to 50. So excited. And, hey, it is just an honor. I guess when you're my age, it's just good to be anywhere. So it's so neat to be able to just lead through all these different decades. So
that's great. I think in 2 years, we're going to throw a celebration while we're doing this.
Hey, I'll do it. I always come to parties.
We will have a cake ready. We need to mark that down. Cake ready 2 years. Partly, I just love eating cake.
Well, true.
Yeah. Well, since you've been doing this 48 years, you've no doubt seen lots of change happen in the church.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about today, leading in seasons of change.
Yeah.
Now, I know anyone who has tried to implement change knows it's not easy and it's not always embraced by others. I'm one of those people, I really don't like change. Why do people, especially like me, resist change so much?
Well, I think the main reason is it's not their idea. We all, we do a little exercise when I teach this workshop. I always just have people pair off 2 by 2 and get back to back And then I ask them to change 7 things. And 100% of the time, as soon as they do it and we have them turn around and go through what did they change, everybody starts putting everything back together. And I always say, who told you to stop and to put everything back? And it just lets us know that any change that's not constantly monitored and not totally led through the whole process, people want to put things like they were before. And, after the pandemic, that's been the biggest problem with church is people say, when is it going to go back to like it was? And the answer is never. Because people have changed. We've all changed. Now in the local church, if you don't do everything online as well as doing it live, we gave people a choice. Now they want a choice. And it's just unreal. It's not going back to the way it was. Most of our churches, they totally changed people. I mean, there were all these new people showing up that wasn't before. And, we just don't like change. But the fact is, change, the one thing that is constant is change is always going to be with us. And it's something that we have to contact. I mean, personally, every dad don't want and mom doesn't want their kids to grow up. But I'm telling you, grandkids are wonderful. It's the reward for not killing the first bunch. And, it's one of those things that I would hate for my kids to just stay little all the time. Mm-hmm. The relationship that I have with my grown kids, their husbands, I don't know what, I know one of them married, my youngest daughter married a guy who's 6'6", and we wouldn't have any batteries in our fire alarms or any light bulbs changed if the tall dude hadn't joined our family. I mean, he can do all this stuff without a ladder. And, where some people say, oh, my daughter got married. Yeah, to Jolly Green Giant. He can change everything. And, well, let's just work the dude. And so we just don't always look at the benefits of change. Mm-hmm. And not all change is good. Change just for change's sake is not good. But if it's a change that's needed to make things better, and I think that's where the church needs to be open to, is just seeking after change. Now, when it comes to life change, we're all about that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's important that we don't do things the same way we always did. And if you want something different, you're going to have to do different actions to get different results. And so that flowing with change, I think if I had not been flexible through all these different stages of my ministry and been open to change, I would have missed out on. So, my first church, I had 7 kids in my children's church. And, we started making some changes and doing some things to go after people in the community that nobody wanted, going after families and things. And I found myself in the 90s working in a church where it grew to where we were reaching 5,000 kids a weekend. And we were doing 3,000 in drive up and 2,000 in bus ministry back in those days. And I just think of, if we don't accept change, then there's going to be a lot of changed lives that don't happen because we weren't willing to flow with changes.
Mm. Well, in ministry, sometimes we know change is needed, but we can lag behind a little bit, and we may not actually make those changes until it's too late or until things are already stale. So when it comes to our ministries, how can we know when it's the right time to implement change, whether it involves vision, mission, services, whatever it may be? How do we know it is the right time?
I think any right time for change is when there's a problem that needs to be solved. And not every change, if you implement a change and the problem's still there, what you thought was the problem is not the problem at all.
True.
And usually it's a series of problems. And I think the important, so many times when people would run out of budget, after the Halloween alternative, and November, December always looked bad. Sometimes it was just a bad planning problem. Other times it was, not being able to make changes within the budget quick enough. We started noticing changes years ago at a church I worked at, and we dropped the whole annual budget and went to planning our budget. We were growing so much. We were growing about 1,700 people a year. And so we just went to an every 3 months budget and started adjusting as we went, and started realizing that during those rapid years of growth, it called for different measures. And I think when it comes to change, you've got to be open and willing to change.
Yeah.
And, some churches, the right time to change is when there's a problem that needs solving. Think about elders or deacons in the church. It was because a problem happened in the New Testament. And, again, the disciples said, it would not be good for us to do this. And so I'm sure there's some people that would say, no, y'all need to be doing this anyway, and all these things. And so they talked about what was good to us. And I think we have to be open to just, at my church, I implemented something called Umbrella of Mercy, where when you said Umbrella of Mercy, you could talk about anything, and people said, we're just brainstorming. We're not attached to it. And, we could throw out something crazy like, let's sell the church and move to Dallas. And that is an option, but it isn't the best option. And so those are the things that just throwing things out. We've got to be flexible and willing to just try something new.
Yeah.
We are excited to introduce you to a remarkable new book that will transform your approach to children's ministry. The Faith of Our Children, 8 Timely Research Insights for Discipling the Next Generation by Matt Markins. If you're a children's ministry leader, you know the profound impact early faith formation can have on young lives. In The Faith of Our Children, Matt Markins, President and CEO of Awana, a global leader in child discipleship, delves into the primary areas that lay the foundation for a lasting faith. This book serves as an indispensable guide, equipping you and your team with the insights and systems needed to cultivate faith that endures. Download a free chapter of The Faith of Our Children at d6family.com.
Well, here at the D6 Conference, you've shared 10 ways to encourage and lead others to embrace change. Can you share just a few of those with our listeners?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to quit trying to figure it out yourself and just seek God and His plan. And just say, hey, let's make this a matter of prayer. Mm-hmm. And let's really seek the Lord and come back and see what He says. I think that's where we start.
Yeah.
Always on our face before God. The second thing is just to constantly evaluate. When you're not evaluating, when a church doesn't know how to keep score, I'm from Alabama originally, so I like all 3 of the major sports: high school football, college football, and professional football. And my daughter Yancy, who'll be on the podcast after me, she married this soccer player. And, to me, there's nothing wrong with soccer. It's just a bad use of a football field.
It's the wrong football,
it's kind of confusing. And so I knew, because she was marrying this soccer player, that my grandkids were probably going to play soccer. And sure enough, the oldest came along and they signed him up for soccer. And, I just realized I didn't know the rules. I didn't know anything about it. I thought, if you just don't, square off and somebody hurts somebody, it's not a good sport. And, all of a sudden I started learning, the rules, and said, man, you got to be in good shape to do all that running. And, when they're little, it's like a game of tag broke out at a soccer match. But, I started learning about it. And all of a sudden I started understanding it, because I understood, what the rules were. And I think churches have to sit down and say, all right, how do you make a first down? How do you score? And a lot of people say, yeah, touchdown is salvation. Well, is it a field goal and discipleship is a touchdown? I think that's probably a little more accurate. And so how do you go for two in the body of Christ? So talking about how you keep score and how you're going to evaluate, there's so many growth things. In my book, Stretch, we talk about, everybody knows that a 7-passenger minivan hosts 5 Americans, especially if they're men. You're not going to get 3 grown men, especially rednecks, on the back seat of a minivan. It's not going to happen. And you can go to a third world country and they'll cram folks. You can get 36 people in a minivan. But it's not going to happen in America. And so knowing when to start another service, knowing when to start another campus, knowing when to do these things has a lot to do with knowing if you're 65, 70% full and understanding those rules of growth and all those things. And so evaluating constantly. Anytime you don't know where you are, you lost. And, that's why I have GPS on my phone, because I get lost all the time. And so evaluate. Another thing I've learned over the years is make personal changes before you ask anybody else to make those same changes. When I'm pointing to my kids and generational discipleship, I got to remember there's 3 more fingers looking back at me. And I've got to make those changes for my kids. And anything that we're asking folks to do, whether it be park across the street in another lot to make room for visitors, we have to model that as staff and do those things. Understand the history of the organization, not so you'll be stuck there, but know how people define different things. In the past, this is what they have done. And understanding that past, what's worked, what's still working, what's a dead horse, what's a sacred cow. I mean, sacred cows make the best hamburgers, and so you got to realize what they are, so you can ground them suckers up and do something different. And so another thing, and what's great about the D6 conference is just networking. What are other people doing? And I always tell folks, find someone in a church about your size in another part of the country and just ask them questions. What's going on? How do y'all handle this? What do you do? Maybe they're handling it better than you. Maybe you're doing better than you thought you were. Every time I find anybody that's going through a building program or something, I want to learn what they learned. I want to learn what not to do. Sometimes knowing what not to do is more valuable than knowing what to do. And so I want to see what others are doing and network, and if there's a better way to do it, then do it. The 6th thing is to brainstorm and seek the opinion and advice of trusted allies. I remember I had some dear friends. We had to do away with a service. We were building a new building, and while we were building that building, rather than 2 services, we went to 3 services. And I remember calling the guy and saying, hey, I need to get rid of a team of volunteers. And so I don't want them to quit, but how can I do it? And after he said, I hate your guts, this is, I can barely get enough and you're trying to get rid of a set of workers. He realized that's a problem. And so I said, what would you do? And he's a great problem solver. And so sometimes just even people that aren't on your staff, I want to get your take on this. Help me see this from a different perspective. Sometimes we're too close to the forest. All we see is trees, and we've got to see what somebody else does. And so that brainstorming really helps. Before you implement a change, it's important that you have a game plan. Planning has to go before action. And also that what goes hand in hand with this, start explaining the change to others, why you need it, and communicate the plan. Then they're not just going to say, well, I hate change. I don't want to change. I like things the way they are. Explain the benefits and talk those things up. And talking up the benefits makes people realize, well, hey, that would be better. So how do we do this? And the problem is the Lord says he'll direct our steps, but most of us don't think in steps. We think in leaps and jumps. And so if the Lord said he'd direct our steps, and our prayers, Lord, help me to break this down into manageable steps in the order that they need to be prioritized in. And then the last thing is one of the things that I have written on my desktop of my computer is to remember there are people counting on me in the future to make these changes so that there can be changes in people in the long run. And so that next generation is counting on me. That's why as an older person, when I meet with younger folks, I ask them, what are 5 apps I need to know about that are on your phone that need to be on mine? Is there a better way to track this? What kind of, things electronically? I don't use a paper calendar. And a lot of people, just I want my paper calendar. But, being able to repeat till Jesus comes back and just let your calendar do that work for you, it's amazing. And I have to, wake up and smell the millennium. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm leading teams that are 40 years younger than me is because I'm willing to do things in new ways. And also, if you were in charge, how would you do this? Getting them involved in the change process rather than just say, do it like me. For the first time in history, there's 5 generations in the workforce. And in a lot of our churches, there's 5 different generations that are in leadership, especially if you count church boards and elders and deacons and things. There's builders, there's boomers, and then now we're looking for the first time, millennials it's really 50-50 with millennials and Gen Z in the leadership of a church. And again, these new generations are coming in, and if we don't know how to speak their language, they're never going to learn from us the things they don't need to throw out just because it came from a boomer. And we've got to be willing to be bilingual. And I teach boomer stuff to millennials and Gen Z by just putting it in their language. And, to go on the mission field, we'd be glad to learn another language to be a missionary. But what about being a missionary to younger people right now? Are we as boomers and builders willing to speak toward future generations? And I think that's where this not being afraid of change and realizing, hey, if you mess up, just start again. And, it's one of those things that if it didn't work, don't ride a dead horse. Just seek some help and let's come up with a different solution. And I found that when I change things from a pure heart out of desire to follow God, then we're able to implement some changes and things that are really welcomed. And especially when you help younger people be a part of the process to bring change.
Well, I appreciate you sharing this because change isn't easy. I'm one of those people that struggles with it, and I know many others do. But the way you've laid it out, it tells us there is a good plan we can implement, and it doesn't have to be scary either. It can be used for good, and it should be used for good. Thank you so much for this. I look forward to year 49 and especially year 50 when we can eat cake together.
When you eat cake, throw a party.
Let's do it. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You know, what I always love about Jim is just how the wisdom and the nuggets just seem to effortlessly flow from him and his years' experience and the humble way in which they do. I think that is always encouraging from him, and just how he's going to give you truth unfiltered, and I love the one-liners that he just spits out. He's like, be willing to change when it's not working. He talks about quit riding a dead horse, and that's just one of those things that stood out to me, and he talks about, leading with the benefits of change and talk them up. That has been key for me throughout the years, is the why and leading with it and shouting it from the rooftops at every chance you get.
Yeah, I agree. I think my very favorite in this season of my life, listening to this as a leader, his first one of saying, quit trying to figure it out, seek the Lord. And I know we all kind of think as ministry leaders, oh yeah, pray about it. But I have been, to be honest with you, I'm really thankful that he said that, because I think oftentimes as leaders, we've got to ask the question, is the Holy Spirit, is God in the peripheral or is he central? And I think that's just the thing we've got to always be asking as leaders. Is he central or is he on the peripheral? Because if he's on the peripheral, then he's an afterthought. And when you're getting stretched and there's tension and change, you invite him in. Whereas I love that he's saying, let's start with him as central. He's the vision. He's the one that's going to give you the perspective. And so I love that he started with that, because that's the mark, I think, of leadership, is that God is central, not just out on the peripheral of where I'm leading change.
I love that. I think godly leaders let Christ lead. And sometimes we just think, oh, I've got it. It's intuitive. And we don't pause and pray. And that was very, very insightful. Marianne, you and I had one. I'll segue to it. I love Jim's ability to cross over and minister and communicate and be accepted among multiple generations. He's always had that. Not every person over the age of even 40 can do that. And he's a good bit older than 40, and young people love him. And he made that statement in there that was somewhat convicting. He said, you know what? If we were going to a mission field, we'd learn another language. He said, yet there are other generations who may feel like a totally different culture to us, but we're not willing to learn their language and learn what makes them tick. That should really move us to do some things differently, don't you think?
Yeah, that's the mark of humility.
It is.
Maybe even as somebody who's I'm a Gen X, I'm in the Gen X frame. That's saying I have something to learn from the Gen Alpha, from the Gen Z, and from the millennial, and from the boomer, and from the builder. or whatever. I that's humility. That's saying all of you in your stage of life and every generation, that's what I believe generational discipleship really is yes, it's passing it along, transferring. But I also think let's not minimize what they bring to us. It's a transfer back and forth. It's not just, I know it all, so let me tell you. It's, let's do life side by side and let's share with each other.
That's right.
I know initially that's what drew me to him. He's a couple seasons ahead of me. But that was always one of those things that drew me him, that he spoke my language. He talked about being generationally bilingual, and he spoke my language. And it was one of the first times somebody that was, older than me, that I knew in ministry as a pastor, as a leader, knew about Leonard Skinner and, all these guitars, like that's a 62, Jaguar. I'm like, oh, wow, he knows his guitars and spoke my language. But that's what drew me to him. But, the first question he asked whenever I'm leading any kind of change is, what is the Lord telling you? What is God saying? And, I love the way that he put it. He said, people in the future are counting on me to make these changes. He is always so forward thinking.
Yes.
He is never stuck in his ways at all. He is always looking to the future. When he said that, people in the future are counting on me to make these changes, I kind of twisted my perspective a little bit in the best of ways.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of takeaway questions we should use maybe daily or weekly is when we're dealing with big things or we're dealing with just everyday staff members is, hey, what is God leading me in? And what have I learned from somebody younger than me? I think that would be a really good one. What insights did I pick up? And if you happen to be in the younger generation, reverse it. What is somebody older than me that doesn't speak my language? What insight did I take away from them? Jim can just, I don't know, join any conversation with me anytime. And I just want to sit quietly and just pick his brain and ask him questions. There's just more we need to get from Jim through the years that we have with him. And I'm thankful that he's part of the D6 family. I'm thankful that he's mentored so many incredible leaders along the way. As we look to next week, we're going to be spending time with Ron Deal. Without a doubt, I would argue the thought leader on broken families, step families inside the church. And I think he was one of the original champions of this many years ago. And now other people are talking about it, but I'm wondering if they would be if it were not for Ron Deal. So next week, if your church deals with broken families, people remarried, blended families, and if you say that's not me, I ask you to check again. So look for that, and we'll join you next week with Ron Deal. Take care.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.